with Congressman Mike Kennedy. Sorry, I almost called you Senator because of your last position.
Yeah, past few years. Yeah.
Yes, and I know it's Christmas Eve, so I don't know how many of you will catch, but I feel that it's very important that we go straight to the source instead of jumping to conclusions on policies. It's really important that we're an informed populace, and the best way to do that is to talk directly to the people. So I wanted to talk to you today about your recent vote. I've seen several people get very upset about it, and I can understand where they're coming from, but I also feel like you have a really strong record of standing up for the people. And I've seen what you've had to go through in terms of standing up here in Utah um, because of your stance on the very vote that you voted against. So just love to hear why you voted.
Thanks, Carrie, for having me on. And I'm grateful for what you say is we really should go to the source and not jump to conclusion. It does seem like some people are quick to come to judgment without willing to consider the various aspects. The first thing I'd say, and again, thank you for having me on, is in 2023, we banned transgendered surgeries, cross-sex hormones, and puberty blockers for minors in the state of Utah, and I led the way on that. So that's one big issue that is really important to me is we've already got a functioning law in the state of Utah that has shut down the University of Utah Transgender Clinic and driven many of these individuals that were practicing in the Wild West on our children. It's driven them out of that kind of practice and driven them out of the state as well. So I'm proud of the work that I, with my legislative colleagues, did in the state of Utah. And that's a major issue with this bill is when the feds step in, then the state is forced out. And we've already got a functioning law that I thought about since 2022. So I've been working on this for 4 years now. I've been thinking about the various policy considerations. And I, of course, thought in 2022 until we passed our bill banning these processes in the state a year later in 23, I thought about criminal convictions and putting doctors in jail. Of course, that was part of the many things that I thought about. And I saw it as an entirely non-functional policy for reasons that I'll explain later if we get to that. But the main thing is when the feds move in, then the state is forced out. And we already have a law that is doing the job. And also say, Carrie, is that it's not been litigated yet. And that's a big deal. So let's pretend this bill that was voted on last week that actually was going to put doctors in jail for the practice in this area is, let's pretend that did become law, and thereby it would challenge or question whether or not Utah's continued ban on that is going to be able to stand. There would be litigation, and that's a big deal because once there's a lawsuit, which we've had no lawsuit on what with the state legislature passed, because we've had no lawsuit, the judges can't get their fingers into it and start redefining and taking over what is actually in the statute. And so if what we voted on last week became law, then the judges guaranteed there's going to be litigation because of the nature of the policy. And that litigation would turn it over to the courts. And you and I and those that listen to this, we understand a vast majority of judges would strike it down. They would strike down this bill that was proposed in the federal legislature. And worse than that is they would redefine the effort to try to protect children. And they may even grant a constitutional right to children to these kind of procedures and cross-sex hormones. In other words, we have to think beyond just the feel-good aspects of passing something, because is it going to be litigated? And if it's going to be litigated, can it withstand a scrutiny of judges? And that's where I'll just hold up what we did in the state of Utah. It has withstood that because they can't find plaintiffs because of how we designed the bill that we did here in the state of Utah in 2023. So I'm proud of that fact. And those are two major considerations associated with this bill. In addition to the fact that when I worked for countless hours to try to find policy that I could get through the legislature, for something to function, it has to pass the House, the Senate, and in the state, it has to be signed by the governor, and the federal government has to be signed by the president. We have a major problem in the federal legislature in the form of we need 60 votes in the Senate. You can't pass anything in the Senate without 60 votes. And so for us to pass a bill that makes us feel good that it's going to protect children and it's got no chance of making it through the Senate, then I mean, we can do message bills if we want, but I'm looking for functioning policy because I really want to protect children. And I did it along with my legislative colleagues and the governor. We did it in the state of Utah already. Those kind of policies, which my team and I are already working on, that we could feasibly, I can't guarantee anything. In Washington, D.C., nothing happens easily. And so I don't know what the appetite of the Senate would be on this. I'm working on that. But I've got functioning policies that would work to actually protect our children that I'm working at in the federal legislature so that we could actually get it through the Senate, get it through the House, and get it to the president's desk so it can do the job that it's supposed to do. I want to point out as well to you and your listeners, 26 states in our union have passed legislation in this area. All 26 of those states that have already passed laws like the state of Utah to protect children, all of them would be jeopardized as a result of federal legislation, if it were to pass, that would potentially challenge what has been done because the feds move in and the states have to move out. So those are some of the thoughts. And I know a lot of people, they just see this as, well, you should vote for this. And I say, this is bad policy. It's not going to make it through the Senate. Worse than that, it's going to jeopardize what 26 states have already done. And finally, I and my team, we're working on functioning legislation that may actually get through the Senate, get to the president's desk. And that's the kind of legislation I think we need, not message bills that are just going to make us feel good, but in fact, in the end, don't protect children.
Okay, so in order to make this as simple as possible for the audience, basically what you're saying is that this bill could be a Trojan horse.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I expand on that, Carrie? Because
Yes, please do.
one of the things that historically we can look at to reflect what I'm talking about is the consequences associated with gay marriage and the Supreme Court finally determining that gay marriage is the law of the land. How did we get to that point? This is, I'd have to reanalyze when that was. It was about 15 years ago. But when the states and the federal government defined marriage, then that put it into code and it became something that could be litigated. And lawsuits were filed and we gave it to the judges. And what do judges do? They strike down the man-woman marriage that actually DOMA, which is the Defense of Marriage Act on the federal level, and I know the state of Utah defined marriage as well as man-woman marriage, and I'm totally supportive of that. Once you put that in code, then there can be lawsuits for it. And there were. So there were lawsuits. Guess what those lawsuits did? They struck down man-woman marriage. They went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And at that point, once we defined marriage in code, we put it up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court struck down those laws and made gay marriage the law of the land. It was not passed by statute. It was actually passed by litigation associated with statute that was trying to do the exact opposite. So your analogy of the Trojan horse, we've seen this history is when we get into the middle of defining men and women in marriage and defining, in this case, what is transgender healthcare for minors, then we're asking for real trouble if we're not going to make it litigation proof, which we did in the state of Utah. We made it so that lawsuits, it's hard for them to find a plaintiff and they haven't sued on the bill that I passed in the state of Utah. So it's still banned in the state of Utah. We need legislation like that in the federal level if we're going to do anything in this area.
So when you say, I really don't like the term transgender healthcare. So,
Oh,
and I know that the new term is sex rejecting procedures.
yeah, I've heard that recently. Yeah.
Can you just give us what your stance on transing minors is?
It doesn't need to be stated because I've already passed it in SB 16 and 23, but I find, so first, it was very clear as I worked through this legislation that almost universally legislators and the people utterly reject 12-year-old, 15-year-old kids having body parts, normal, healthy body parts cut off. That and revised in ways that most people would cringe at basic descriptions of what that is. So I've already banned those kind of surgeries in the state of Utah, and it's very clear that using cross-sex hormones, so girls getting testosterone, boys getting estrogen, it can cause permanent change to their bodies and damage them. In addition to puberty blockers, which I know some people that frankly aren't that sophisticated with medications like Lupron. They'll say, "Oh, it's like putting a pause on a song. You pause it, and then you can, when you want to, restart it." I think that's utter nonsense, because if you look up Lupron, which is the puberty blocker most often used, it's not even FDA cleared for children to be used. So the FDA hasn't even authorized the use for children just to stop puberty. But invariably, these children don't grow normally. That their bones are not going to grow right, their blood vessels, potentially many other parts of their bodies aren't going to grow right, and that may be a permanent change. So people that are advocates for this would say, well, how do you know that's a problem? And I say the exact same question back is, we don't have 20 or 30 or 40 years worth of data of using these kind of medicines on children that are normal. We have a condition called precocious puberty. They have been using puberty blockers on, if a 6-year-old starts to develop puberty changes to their bodies, then there's an abnormality. Or if they have cancer, heaven forbid, and they need some kind of treatment to block the hormones that might feed the cancer, in the case of testicular or ovarian cancer, which children sadly can get these kind of things too, then there are cases where disease states will drive the use of these medicines. But when it comes to using that for a normal, healthy child who just feels like they're in the wrong body, there's no long-term evidence. And those that advocate for this will say, well, let me show you this. And they show studies. The studies are notably weak. They don't have long-term data. And the studies are often based on retrospective or looking back surveys and interviews. They're not based on randomized controlled, placebo-controlled trials, which are the standard, gold standard of trials. If we're going to get into areas, we really, especially with our children, we should have long-term data that is accurate and reflective of the risks and benefits. And in this case, there is no such data, in spite of what the advocates and medical community accept as appropriate treatment in these areas.
Sorry, that's the mailman coming behind me. Yeah, I think one of the things that's important that I didn't give you in a very good introduction is that you are both a doctor, a physician, and a lawyer,
Yeah.
which is kind of, I mean, we're pretty lucky in that, we've got we have both of that with you.
Well, I'm
And
honored to use those skills, Carrie. And that's one thing I offer to people, is that I think deeply about these things. And in this area, for 4 years, I've been thinking about various policies. So when people and I respect people's opinions about this. I read the bill, I studied it, I thought about it. And if people have done the same and come to a different conclusion than I've come to, I respect that. I don't expect
right,
anybody to necessarily believe where I'm coming from, but as an attorney, I know how powerful judges are and how the courts can do the exact opposite to legislation from what the legislator, in my case, my legislation intended. And I'm really sensitive to that because I'm an attorney. On the doctor side, I know how powerfully damaging these surgeries and puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones can be. And I've studied the systematic evidence review, and I know what is out there, and the evidence that the advocates in this area promote, it's weak. And so the idea that we're using weak evidence for children to have incontrovertible or permanent change to their bodies is a travesty. So my stance on this is, I have no support in my heart or mind as to these procedures. As a 10-year state legislator and now serving the good people of Utah for 1 year in Washington, D.C., is I want policy that's going to work. I want policy that actually makes a difference. And if there are people listening to this that want me to grandstand and want me to send messages out but not do functioning legislation, I can appreciate that, and they can want that all day. But I want legislation that's going to make it to the president's desk and actually do the job it's supposed to. And this legislation that I voted on a week ago, it's not going to do that for many different reasons. And that's why I'm glad that we could talk about this. But if somebody, being a doctor and attorney, a 10-year, 11-year legislator now, 1 year in Washington, D.C., is if they don't respect my opinion on that, that's fine. That's their call on that. But I've spent a lot of time thinking about these things. And the bill that I voted against last week, it's not a good bill for any number of reasons.
I think that it's important that we recognize that we do have a lot of activist judges. we have a lot of ideologically captured judges, because I would say that the transgender ideology is it's not rooted in science. And I'm
No,
not a doctor. I'm just I'm just a mom.
you're
But
wise.
it's
You and those that, yeah, people understand there's something wrong with this, and it's new too, Carrie. I mean, that's the thing is this stuff. You and I, if we go back 20 years ago, 25 years ago in the state of Utah, and I've been practicing doctor work for 25 years. I didn't 25 years ago. I'd never heard of anybody with gender dysphoria, um, and I'm a middle aged fellow. This idea that this has been going on for thousands of years and it's just been unrecognized. I don't know. I've lived a lot and I've not seen it. So this idea that in the past 10 years, all of a sudden a new disease state has arisen from nowhere, it actually goes back to the judges, like you're saying. It's an ideology, and people are being instructed on this. And it's one thing to have a belief system of a certain way, but it's another for a child to make decisions that will permanently alter them and their ability to live a normal functioning life. And we on the societal side should do everything we can to protect our children. As a father of 8 children, I have 11 grandchildren. As a doctor protecting children, as a state legislator protecting children now in Washington, D.C., working to protect children and our citizens, there's no hesitancy I have to do everything I can to protect children. There's various issues that I consider when it comes into this area, and that's where I'm honored to do my best to work through these complicated issues and try to make a difference, which is the legislation that we will propose. It's actually going to be clever in a way that it's going to get the job done, but it might even be able to get Democrats in the Senate, which we'll need to get to the 60 vote threshold to get something passed and actually get it to President Trump's desk. Can't guarantee anything, as I've already said, because Washington, D.C. is a difficult place to get anything done. But with this bill that we voted on last week, there were 3 Democrats that voted for that bill. I do think that the Democrats even progressive liberals will see there's something wrong with this process. And I want to take advantage of those people that have common sense, like you and those that listen to you and are listening to this podcast. I think most of us with that, you don't have to be a doctor to recognize that cutting off normal body parts when you're 15 years old is not it's just not a smart policy for the state or the federal government to allow it to happen.
So it seems to me that this is the emperor's new clothes, that most people with common sense that are not incentivized in one way or another recognize that we're lying to children. One of the things that I'm concerned about in terms of how we could lessen how many kids are going down this track is the inclusive school policy.
Right.
So is there anything there that can be done? Because that is still in Utah. We still
Great
have.
point. And as an expert in education like you are, and we all should be invested in our education systems, I will say as a federal legislator now, the federal government has gotten way too involved in school systems, and that can be a major problem. So I will turn to my local and state school board friends, teachers, parents, and students, and that should be driven by the state as to curriculum. But I'm very disappointed with what I hear. There's a lot happening in our schools that may actually promote this. And I'll just say to parents, and I know you and those that listen to you, you are deeply invested in protecting our children through the school system. But we can't shop out our children into school and then just presume everything's going the way that it should. We should be very diligent to support and help our school systems and our teachers so that they are giving our children the best education possible, and that these kind of ideologies are not sneaking in one way or another. I'll point to, you mentioned the activist judges. Just a few days ago, based on the timing of when we're doing this interview, is a judge that actually blocked ICE from there was an illegal immigrant in the court, and this judge actually actively blocked ICE from enforcing the law and detaining this individual. And that judge had a felony charge and has been convicted of a felony. And that's right. And if there's ideologies sneaking into our judicial system, which they have, ideologies sneaking into our school system, which they have. We as parents and as citizens who care, we should be actively surveying and participating in the process, particularly with education. But I want to keep the federal government out of the school system, and I'm proud of the work that we've done in the federal level with the Department of Education. I haven't heard about that for 10 months, but Donald Trump pretty much disassembled the Department of Education, and that on the federal level, and that is appropriate because the states can do this. They should do this.
I
And I'm
do
all
worry about
on
who
schools.
in the states will have that control though, because I'm watching some very activist educators get very excited about the idea that they will have control of what's going on in our schools. And a lot of people will say, I just want my child to learn how to be kind, and if they are to grow up queer, which queer is not gay, lesbian, or even trans. Queer is an ideology. And so they're thinking if they do, then they want to be accepted. And I think that's fine if you want to do that for your own children. My concern is that you want every child to be taught the same thing that you want, and there's a lot of parents who would say, hey, I don't want my child to be confused about their gender. It's something that's so obvious. There are the intersex question, or even like polycystic ovarian syndrome, right? A lot of people will get pushed into this because of having polycystic ovarian syndrome. They'll say, "Oh, well, you're actually, your hormones are imbalanced. That means that you're intersex, right?" How can we stop this? I mean,
Well,
what can
what you
parents
haven't,
do?
the other thing you haven't added in is the autism and the fact that autism and special needs children may be more vulnerable to these ideologies and be more easily convinced that that
Yes.
something's wrong with them. I've had patients approach me, young patients that have approached me, and what you've suggested is uh, it's hard growing up. I would never want to go back to be 10 to 17 years old. It's just hard. And so for us to put more burdens on children that they're supposed to wonder about whether they're in the right body or not, it's a terrible, terrible burden for these children. And so when I have children and their parents that have approached me in the doctor's office, is we talk about, look, if you're a girl that likes to play sports and may have more musculature than other girls, there's nothing wrong with that. Or if you're a boy that likes to stereotypically sing and do crochet or stitch, there's nothing wrong with that either. Is on the grand spectrum of male female genders, there's any number of differences, and it's a great world full of really remarkable people that take things from different perspectives. And my general advice as a primary care doctor to those people would be, can you put these really hard questions to the side for a time and just enjoy the fact that your body works, that you can get up and move and you can see and you can hear and you can use your hands to write and play music, and that you can think and learn. And whether or not, and that's part of what my bill in 23 banning this stuff did, as well as what on the federal level we should look at, is we're talking about minors. We want children just to enjoy life, learn the things that they need to learn. And after age 18 years old, if you want to do these things, then that's fine. You're an adult now, and society has to have some cutoff at some point. I actually think 18 is too young too. I mean, I think some people might do things at 18 that they regret later on, but at least 18 is different than 15 or 14. Is we don't want to rush children into these really hard conversations. But as a doctor, I just think about this. When we're talking about these body parts, when you're talking about that aspect of the body, we're talking about reproduction, significant neurologic system aspects, as well as waste products. We're talking the urinary system, neurologic system, as well as reproductive system in that area. This is not simple. It is very complicated in that area. And the idea that somebody's going to use chemicals or they're going to use surgeries to potentially alter those systems to the detriment of the rest of their life of normal function is a travesty, which is why most people normally would just look at this and say, it's a terrible idea. I agree. But let's just let kids be kids until they're 18. And then after that, you can make decisions if you want to make decisions about this. The final thing I'll say, Carrie, and this is where the nuanced legislation that we passed in Utah that has not had a lawsuit yet, and it still stands, these bans that I put into place with my legislative friends, is one of the things we put in there is a statute of limitations enhancement. Normally, if a doctor does something to somebody and they have a problem with it, then they have 3 years to sue in the state of Utah, roughly. It depends on the timing of this. We put in there that if any of these people feel like they've had harm, they have until they're 25 years old. And that's great. It's a great policy. And in fact, when I'm looking at the federal stuff that we're doing, that's one really healthy policy is, doctor, if you're going to do this kind of stuff with children, then that child, as a 15-year-old, not very sophisticated, with different reasons to be pushed into this, you better be really careful and thoughtful, doctor, because this kid who's going to grow up and be 21 and 23 and think, I'm having urine infections all the time because of this surgery you did to me. I have numbness and tingling and nothing works in the area that you operated on, doctor. And I'm 22 years old now. I'm filing a lawsuit and I've got until I'm 25 years old to file it. And your malpractice is, you're going to pay for your malpractice. Because that's another complicated thing with this, Carrie, with you and your listeners. How do you consent a child, a 14-year-old child, how do you get consent from them to have a surgery done, like a mastectomy, when they're never going to be normal again in that area for the rest of their lives? They'll never be normal. They'll never be able to nourish their child with these kind of procedures.
And we're talking about kids. I mean, Utah has certain things that are peculiar about it, in that a lot of our kids are very innocent. So when you tell a child, excuse my language, but if you were to tell a child you may not feel anything if you are, or you may never orgasm, they have no idea what that even means.
Right.
And so they get into this place of who cares?
Right.
I just know what TikTok told me. I just know what my new science program told me. And, I feel good. And another thing is that I believe it can breed narcissism and it can breed activism. So there's a lot of these people who are becoming very violent are on that trans spectrum. And I want to know what can be done about that. Now, I know that one thing that you recently voted on was the Do No Harm bill, HB 498. And that was, can you just explain that for me?
That one is the bill that bans, and these are the kind of federal policies we should put into place. But Medicaid as a federal program, there will be no reimbursement for procedures or medicines in this area of care through Medicaid. And I just think that another very common sense thing. And in fact, right the next day after I voted against this, what I consider to be bad policy bill, that's a message bill that's never going to make it through the Senate, and so on and so forth. But the very next day, I voted to ban these procedures through Medicaid, payment for these procedures. And that's actually, I'll say, Carrie, is as I'm continuing to work through the bill that I and my team are working on, Medicaid and Medicare payments for these things, as well as the HHS, Department of HHS and the federal level, they've recently said any hospital taking Medicare and Medicaid, and they all take it because there are millions of patients on these programs. Any hospital doing these procedures on minors is not going to have Medicare or Medicaid reimbursements. Those are also connections from the federal government that actually, part of the nuanced aspect of that does not interfere with the 26 states, including Utah and myself, that have already banned these things. That's a federal connection. That's a different level. And I want to put that in my bill as well, where if you're going to take Medicare and Medicaid hospital, you can't do these procedures in your system. And it's a great step because it actually is an appropriate aspect of federal policy. But the bill that I voted against, same thing, as if it came in, it might shove to the side what has been working in the state of Utah now for 3 years that has banned these procedures on children. So there are various policies, but I think we should look at this in a careful way and make sure that what we're doing is not only going to get past the Senate and then on the president's desk, but it's going to do its job for the long term. And I will hold out anybody criticizing my vote, is I will hold out my record on this stuff is still the things that I did in 2023 with my friends in the legislature. It still stands here in the state of Utah. So, and I'm proud of that work because it was thoughtful work that took countless hours to put together in a way that is doing the job without putting it in the hands of activist judges.
I really appreciate that. I have one question for you that somebody had asked me, and that was, this bill became, it was presented in May. Why did you wait to put forth any objections?
Uh, yeah, actually, I found out that's a very good question because I only found out about this bill I think 2 weeks ago,
Okay.
and I hadn't seen it. So there's a variety of things about how Washington works. Is this bill wasn't even coming up? It wasn't going to be voted on, except the sponsor of the bill, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and people can think what they want about her. But we have a very narrow majority in the House of Representatives. We have a 3-vote majority, and when Marjorie leaves, which she's leaving in 10 days or something, I'd have to count it up, but she's leaving soon. By the way, I'll say she's walking away from this bill. She's leaving the legislature. She's not going to be there to shepherd it forward anymore. I mean, she got out of the House, but who's gonna move it in the Senate? She's not going to do it. So that's a problem. If it's that important, why is she leaving? When she leaves, we'll have a 1-vote majority. It's just a bare majority. And in fact, what she did was reportedly 2 weeks ago for a vote. I don't know what bill. This is just what I heard on the rumors on the street as to how it operated, is that Marjorie went to the speaker and said, I'm voting no on your bill that you need my vote on, unless you put my bill on the floor, essentially before we leave. And I resign my position. And so the speaker, to get her vote, agreed to put this bill up. So when the bill was, in other words, it wasn't going to be heard, and I didn't even know it was out there because it was, I don't know when it was published. If that was May, that's fine. I understood it went to a committee that I'm not on, and so I wasn't there in the committee. I didn't. There's a lot of bills moving around. I'm trying to pass bills and in my committees, so I didn't even know it was circulating through the process until about 2 weeks before the vote, and I didn't know for sure if we were ever going to look at it. So then I was given the text of the bill on Monday, and I had to vote on it on Wednesday. So that's how Washington operates, is that if there's a bunch of committees, I sit on some and not on others, and bills that are going to be heard in committees may never get to the House floor. So I'm not reading all the bills that are in all the committees because they may never get to the floor. But Marjorie forced this bill to the floor, and that's fine. I mean, that's the strategy she can use to get her stuff heard. But in this case, I actually didn't get the text of the bill until 2 days before, and through that period of time considered it. So if anybody's criticizing the fact that it's been circulating since May, I've been doing a lot of things and didn't even know if this bill ever was I didn't know it was there, and I didn't know it was coming to the floor until a few days before. So it's just how it goes, and I don't think that anybody else knew either until Marjorie forced the speaker to get the bill put on the House floor.
So when is your bill coming forward? And
Yeah, go ahead. And what?
and I was just going to say, what can parents do? How can we change the messaging? Because when I was listening to a lot of Democrats talk, and they tend to lead with emotion.
Right.
I can't believe this. This is so atrocious. Our poor children, blah, blah, blah. How do we fix our messaging in a way that, because this is common sense once again, right? So what do we how do we change the messaging in a way that will relate to more people? Because I think that in Utah, the majority of people are common sense if they know, but they're presented. The other side is very, very good um, at their messaging. What can we do?
So we expect my bill to be introduced in the next 4 weeks or so. Although once again, I want to build a coalition, make sure everything's tapped together, put together in a way that's going to make it as effective as possible, because I want to get it through the Senate. And I need those 60 votes. So in the next 4 to 6 weeks is what I'd expect. That and as I say, I've been working on this policy for years. I've been in this area thinking about this stuff. So we'll see what we're able to get together with the drafting attorneys as well as the team and building a coalition. And that's exactly what you're saying about messaging, is that we need to be thoughtful about how we do this. And I'm realistic about how it goes, but things need to be simply stated. So here's what we did in the state of Utah is we actually targeted a doctor's license. And I actually think that is easier to message than putting doctors in jail for doing this practice. Is that when you're putting people in jail, people that are maybe on the fence about what's going on with this, they start thinking that's pretty serious. When a doctor like me is proposing legislation to punish a doctor with their licensure, I'll tell you right now, as a doctor, that means a lot to the doctor. It's just like you as a teacher. When your teaching license is jeopardized, that's your livelihood, and you're going to take that seriously. But the average public, they don't see that as that unusual. That is the right and the role of the government, is to work on licensure and requirements and obligations associated with the privilege of being a teacher like you or a doctor like me. So part of it, and I'm glad you asked the question about messaging, Carrie, is part of it is our policy needs to be effective, but it needs to not be any more heavy-handed than it has to be to get the job done. Because otherwise, we get average public people out there that get angry because it just seems so unbalanced.
And that can be on both sides. I want to stress that, because I have seen some of the things against you without having the conversation have just been like, wait a second, we've all been at the same awards ceremony, so maybe we should talk first before having.
And I'm good with people making judgments as they wish, but I'm slow to judge, and also I want to think carefully about the stuff that I'm doing. And if that offends people, I'm sorry. But as a legislator, I take really seriously this work that we're doing. And when it comes to messaging, we need to. So here's an example of what we did in Utah. Is when I expand the statute of limitations, and when I explain that to people, that a child that has been harmed can sue that doctor up until age 25 years old. Most people they're not going to get excited about that at all. They're like, well, okay, that sounds fine. But the doctor doing this work is going to like, I got 10 years of a possible lawsuit from this child that's 15 years old. That means a lot to the doctor. So we need to be thoughtful about our policies that we're moving so that people are not incensed. The second thing is we need to be focused on protecting the children. And protecting the children is not about message bills. It's not about grandstanding and putting forward legislation that makes us feel good, but never crosses the finish line of the president's desk. And on two levels, even if I can get out of the Senate, I need to get it past a president who may want to veto it if there was another president in the White House. So we need to be, as legislators, thoughtful about how we're proposing these things so it actually gets through the process, and that the public does not rise up in rebellion against the concept. And that's where it gets to be. We can talk about this concept, but I'll say to you, Carrie, is I don't just talk about it. I've done it. In the state of Utah, when was the last time you heard anybody complaining about the outright ban that I and my state legislative friends and the governor, that we put on this practice in the state of Utah? I haven't seen it in the news. I haven't seen anybody publish on this. And it's because we targeted areas that make a difference. Like I say, we shut down the transgender clinic in the University of Utah that was operating, and it's because of our legislation that we were able to do that, that we have been able to keep the messaging war on our side, that people are not rising up in the streets and marching in protest on that bill, because it is a nuanced bill that impacts the practitioners in this area, but the average public people don't see it as a problem at all.
I think it's really important to understand that, and I'm sorry, I cannot remember the name of the gender clinic, but there was an expose that showed that doctors knew what they were doing, and that many of the young people within 5 years had regret.
Yeah.
And so expanding it to the 25 years is wonderful, especially if they're starting at 13, which a lot of them are. So if they're starting that young, so you're stopping gender affirming, you're stopping medication, you're stopping, this stops medication and it stops surgery. Does it also stop like chest binders, or are those allowed here or encouraged here?
That's a good question. I haven't, because that's not permanent, I haven't dug in deep on that. That's where it gets to be interesting, though, is Medicaid. I mean, the do no harm, Medicaid's not going to pay for that if we can get that through the Senate too. I mean,
That's
it all
fantastic.
has to pass through the Senate, right?
Well,
But
because
go
people
ahead.
will jump on something if it's free. But if
Yes.
it's not free, they will think twice or 3
Yes.
times before going for it. But free, they're like, "Yeah, I'm entitled to this."
Yes.
Um,
Yes. And so in the case of payment for these sort of things, then that's where we should target those sort of things, because when
It'll reduce it so much.
yeah, because people don't. So one of these surgeries that Dr. Oz from CMS was talking about just last week is $150,000. That there's, in some cases, this can be a cash rich aspect of that system's medical practice. And when we target the money flow, then that's invariably going to target the practice, because doctors aren't interested in doing a $150,000 procedure and not getting paid for that. So and that's another nuanced aspect to this, is that you don't have to throw doctors in jail. You don't have to uh, sue parents or do something that would make people think twice about it. You shut down the flow of money and practices change, and people would say, yeah, Medicaid shouldn't be paying for that. Yeah, we shouldn't be paying for that, which is why I voted for that bill. And it's a good bill for the federal legislation aspect, because it's got a connection, but it's not going to interfere with what Utah and 25 other states have already done in this area. So I'm looking for ways to augment what we're doing in the state of Utah without damaging it.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to say?
I'll just say, anybody that has a question about my attitude towards these things doesn't know my record, or maybe doesn't care to look into my record, as I am deeply invested in protecting children. I love my children. I love my grandchildren. It's been my privilege as a primary doctor to care for older folks as well as brand new babies. And I've seen, I mean, I'm a primary care doctor, so I've helped babies that were brand new be healthy as children growing up. And I've seen them go on missions, get married, and start to have their own children too in the 25 years I've done this. So I would wish that, and I know in public opinion, it's easy to condemn, and people are quick to condemn. That's fine. They can take the superficial level, but I am grateful to think carefully about these things and try to do my best to represent the good people of Utah. And I have no question that we need to do on the federal level some things that could add to what these 26 states have done to protect children. And I'm working on legislation to do that. But anybody that questions that I want to see children mutilated and damaged permanently is they're not giving me any sort of scrutiny or opportunity to explain them myself. And I'm grateful that we could spend some time together. But my record is clear. I don't need to just talk about this. I have done it. And I've done it to my own detriment, where my house was vandalized. I still have a death threat on my phone that I keep as a museum piece. I had hundreds of evil emails telling me that I deserved to rot in terrible places for the work that I did in 2023 to try to protect children. So my record is clear, and if people aren't willing to give me the benefit of the doubt on that, I'm sorry, I'm not able to convince them. But my record stands for itself, and we'll do our best in the federal level to try to also protect children where we can. But I'm grateful that we could talk and open a continued conversations as we work through the very complicated nature of Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much, Congressman. I just think it's very important that people are able to hear, and so hopefully, as I put this out, more people will share it, and they will, reach out if you have any questions. It's important to speak to accessible representatives. We don't always have that.
For
So
you, anytime you want to, let's do this again on any number of different things. But I appreciate you reaching out, and hope your holidays go well in the meantime.
I appreciate that you took the time on Christmas Eve. So it was like,
pleasure
I
to do it.
don't
Yep,
have any other time. So I very much appreciate it. Thank you so much.
that's my pleasure. Have
Have
a
a
good
great
rest of the
day.
day.
Thank
Thank you.
you.